Hey, it's Chris. We are talking, finally, Enormity. Into the Unknown, send me the prototype. The spiritual successor to Aeon Trespass Odyssey. You are an astronaut, a spacer in an abandoned, utterly massive, bigger than anything you've ever been able to imagine, ship called the Shepherd. And you're exploring it in a Metroidvania roguelike tabletop manner in order to find out what secrets, what discoveries, and what enemies are lurking along the way. It takes a lot of the things that Aeon Trespass Odyssey, as a boss battler with an encampment phase in between, some mitigation, some growth, some forging, some upgrading, and ties it all together with an alien nemesis theme as a whole. What's new? What's different? So what am I going to tell you in this video? I'm going to give you an overview. I'm going to lay out the important mechanics that you need to know based off of what I've seen so far in the prototypes. My pros, my cons, my thoughts in between so far. If you want a really good playthrough, go do Meet the Tables. You can watch the whole first scenario get played through. They do a great job at that. What am I going to give you though? I'm going to give you some opinions. That's why you're tuning in. Let's do this. So full disclaimer, right? I love Aeon Trespass Odyssey here. So I have to put that out there at the beginning when we're talking about what we've got going on here. And I'll be completely transparent about this. I was very trepidatious looking through this rulebook, really diving in, trying to grasp the ethereal nature of some of these concepts and trying to figure out what exactly it's going to bring to the table that is not going to be overwhelming, but still be enjoyable. And that's the big conundrum in a game like this. When you're talking scope, when you're talking into the unknown, you're talking one of these big narrative campaign scenario, whatever, Awakened Realms style-ish, whatever vibe it may be, can you incorporate all things equally like a heavy Lacerda? Are things going to be as well adjoined? And why do I think already, right, this has the potential to be Into the Unknown's best game, period? And again, I say that as a person who had Aeon Trespass Odyssey as their game of the year of 2022. So, I have some bias glasses on with this, but let me tell you why I feel some of that. And you can then help make the decision for yourself on whether or not this is going to appeal in the same regard. So like I mentioned, one of the main aspects of this are the location books, these spiral bound notebooks with the graphical layout. I have two of them right here, location book 1, location book 2, that you're going to be utilizing for the incursions, which are your one-off runs of your Metroidvania-esque, if you're familiar with the video game term. If you're not familiar with that term, it's just basically the Castlevania meets Metroid as you're side-scrolling along the way, going on these adventures until you reach a certain designated point when you can then upgrade, save, rinse, repeat, and do it again in a slightly different, more nuanced version than what you did previously. And it's become all the rage on the console side of things. And now we're seeing a port onto the tabletop. And so the main question you have to ask yourself is, does it work? And yes, it does. The tricky point, though, with this game is that what we have in this prototype is very limited because it scripts a lot of the first main scenario that you're doing here that I sort of have a pseudo setup for. It's not perfectly set up because I wanted to illustrate some things that aren't necessarily in that first opening without spoiling everything. But then I also wanted to illustrate some of the things that are going to be spoilers along the way, some of the upgrades, some of the changes, some of the, good stuff, right? The really good stuff. There are some limitations, though, at the same time, because it doesn't really give us a great depth of what the realistic majority of the game are going to be, or at least what Into the Unknown has said, of a lot of the incursions going back and forth. But there's already some nuances that we'll talk about that are separating it out rather than just being a complete reskin of Aeon Trespass Odyssey, because I think that is a lot of concern if you're looking at this going, Chris, don't I already have this? Don't I already have this in a different form? Don't I have one of those at home already, Chris, that meme? But that's what my concern was as well going forward. So what you're doing is you're going through a two-phase system. You have your spacer actions, and you have then your intruder actions. And for a lot of your incursions, we're going to talk about the boss battle separately, because that is very much like the Aeon Trespass Odyssey, where you have an AI deck, then you've got a body part that you have to wound, you have to do certain amount of wounds or body parts to be taken out, and in order to defeat the boss. And it's going to have the inverted system where as you do more damage, you become more powerful. The bosses become more powerful, and they have their own decks right here, and they've got the AI deck that you can kind of see here, and then they've also got your usual upgrades where you've got your level 3s and you've got your level 2s and your level 1 attacks, so you can kind of upgrade those as you've done enough damage, replacing one for another as you go. But the main gist is going to be the incursion. And the first thing that I'll say is that I worried about the flippable maps. It works just fine. It's got a grid-based system, as you can kind of see here, of what you're sort of managing. And with your characters, with your spacers here, if I put them on the map, the tricky part with this is, as the prototype, there was not a really great way to identify them, so I kind of had to do it myself. There were no rings, to color coordinate with your actual units. And so keeping track was probably actually one of the hardest parts of the prototype. That being said, this map is populated by several different things that we'll talk about here. You've got the blips around the outside. These are represented of your bad guys that you don't know. Sort of like Alien with the actual movie, when they've got the radar thing and they're holding it and they can see boop, boop, boop. That is the main mechanism of how these intruders are going to be interacting with you. And depending on what area you're in, you're going to have a couple of these sheets that will go up alongside of it. For example, at the beginning, you have the grin, and you'll be able to number them and label them 1 through 5 potentially with this sheet, because when you spawn them, when you see them, when they run into you on the map, you put one of these underneath whatever their miniature is to indicate, because not only will you have the regular ones, you'll also have special body parts if you pull a unique blip that you're going to customize and have several different options that are going to, well, give it different attributes, keywords, or statistics that may, well, really make it terrible depending on how badly you pull, like I do. And then you go into the AI system that's over here. It gives you the basic targeting of how close they are, if they're close enough, if they're not, or what else they may do, and what happens depending on what else can go on during the full game, or what their response is. And in this case, if there are less than 2 of them, essentially blips or grin on the board, you immediately just spawn more. And then the automas over here, which are your basic fungally infected machines that run the ship, well, they've got a whole new system here as well that you can kind of see. And again, getting customized and having different attacks based on what happens, as well as something special that happens the first time you encounter them that's going to change sort of the dynamics that you may have been trying to prepare yourself for in the first place. And so as you're exploring, these blips are going to be moving towards you. But how you're doing that is based off of the action protocol system that they've got set up. And this is something I really think is really freaking cool. And to explain that, though, we have to take a half step back, because I have to show you what your spacer suit looks like, because it plays into directly what these cards are, these double-sided action cards that you are going to be creating. Because those action cards and what actions you have available to you, the 6 that you have, are dependent on your suit and your player character. And the suit and the player character also directly tie into the actions as well as the adrenaline action that you'll be taking. And that's represented by this bar right down here. And your suit similarly has one below it. And so what you're going to have is you're going to have a little action marker like this in between. And the black bar right there represents your adrenaline. Your adrenaline moves up. Your stress is your yellow, and your red is your health. And so your health is going to move down. Your stress and your adrenaline are going to move up. A lot of actions have adrenaline, and anytime you have adrenaline, you get to put anything that's essentially this side of your adrenaline marker here, token-wise, into the token pool, which is going to then go have a incoming and an active phase there, if I can actually hold it right so you can read it. And so what happens is at the end of your turn, anything that's on the incoming goes into the active, so the next person can use. And then the active, if they aren't used, well, they get lost. And so that's going to be the action key system there. There are 3 types of tokens. You have discipline, you have expertise, and you have this circular one, which I'm completely, utterly blanking on as soon as I turn on the camera. And that basically just gives you 3 different things. A lot of your active abilities And your stratagems will be activated by the expertise. The circle, well, it gives you the rerolls. And then the discipline allows you to cancel or upgrade some of the things along the way that you'll be dealing with on the dice. And so you're going to be pooling those according to where your adrenaline is as you're using the adrenaline action. And so that's going to directly correlate and correspond to the action cards that you're going to have available to you. Well, I just told you those action cards are actually going to be more predicated on, for example, your suit here. And your suit, actually, it tells you right down here, the standard EVA suit, steady walk, desperate measures, and hurried walk. And so that's going to be part of it. And then my character card here has cautious sneaking, stressful brainstorm, and anxious sneaking. And it's going to be upgradable, you can kind of see here on the full game only side of things. So we don't have a full explanation of some of what those things are going to be. Now, this wouldn't be an Aeon Trespass death, style monster-ish vibe if you couldn't upgrade some of this stuff as well. And so some of the unlocks within the opening scenario, spoilers here, you fight the giant Mothman. It's freaking terrifying, actually, as he interludes on the actual scenario, but that's spoilers for a minute down the line. And you get upgraded suits, sort of like your skins or your titans for Aeon Trespass Odyssey. But it's a lot more straightforward and it's a lot more streamlined, and it just is a really cool thing. Now, the other thing at the bottom of your suit you'll see is that you have capacity, meaning I can carry 1 support item, I can carry 3 things in my backpack, and this tells me a range of 2 for my light, which is a white cube when I want to roll it. And then it goes into this action system, and we'll talk about the action system right now. A lot of your actions are going to be moving, making noise, or dealing with your weaponry. And so fast reload means you spend an expertise token to get 1 bullet in the chamber. Then on the other side, because again, you have to flip these over one or the other each turn, because you get 3 actions per turn. So all 3 of your cards, if you so choose. Move a space. If not proceeded or followed by another move, you can reload. We'll skip that red one and we'll come back to that in a second. Move 2 spaces, gain a stress. And then you can reduce your stress by 1 by paying the expertise token. Now, this is the other main action performance that you're going to be doing. On one side, it's an attack, and this is an adrenaline icon here. So that means that you move your adrenaline up, you add the tokens to the tray, like I mentioned. On the other side, this is the main other portion of things you're going to be doing. Scouting, scavenging, full reload, rationalizing, catching breath, and rearming. That sounds like a lot. The keyword terminology here is not great. It's not as intuitive as you may like. That's one of the biggest criticisms I can put out for this prototype demo. And one of the biggest things I'll say about the rulebook is the integration of the rulebook. It still reads more like people who have really played the game. And so learning it was still a big learning curve in terms of the actual flow of the game. Scouting is using that light that I just mentioned. It's going to be helping you identify these blips and turning them over to find out, hey, was that actually, oh, phew, that wasn't actually a bad guy. Or, oh, crap, it was 2 whites and a red, which depending on what part of the round game scenario you are in, it may spawn 2 whites, it may spawn all 3 of them. And so that's the sort of thing you're going to be having to deal with. Then scavenge is your interact, essentially. Anything on the board, including a lot of the tokens, the engrams, which are resources that you can use during the actual runs for additional moves or, healing essentially of those ways. Or this is the part we don't really know a whole lot about because it's not really included in the prototype, is you can use these in between the runs back at your base in order to upgrade, to craft those sorts of things, which I'm really excited to see what they can do with that. Then you also have sort of these other interaction consoles in that way. And then you also have little spots here, just out of camera shot here, that have numbers on them that you can interact with that are going to correspond to the Mythos book, where you're going and reading from the designated numbers that are there and having tests and skills that will go along with that, with your dice rolls, which correlates directly a lot of the time to the statistics along the top of your character. And so you have things like your intelligence, your dexterity, your strength, your wisdom, and I'm forgetting what all these are. Maybe that's insight. I forget. But all of those 5 attributes, right? It's like as soon as you turn the camera on, you forget half the words that you need to say. And so you're going to be taking all of those actions. But this is where the blips come in, because a lot of these actions you saw, they create noise. And so noise is basically what bad things are getting nearer to you. So what you do with noise, and this is going to be the most controversial make it or break it, and I've seen some people already say it's super boring, and I've had some people say, wow, the tension, because truth be told, these blips right now are just sitting around the outside. But when you have to roll your dice, you roll your dice based on how many blips are on the board, and you roll them, and you actually look for incompletes. If I actually grab, because at the beginning you start with the white dice, and we'll talk about that in a second. But then it's, instead of the successes, which are your full bars for like my characters, it's actually the potentials. So I would have to move one blip one space. And if you're looking at this, it's a little bit confusing because your characters are on the squares themselves in the middle of them, but the blips are actually on the vertices between the squares. And so they move zigzagged towards you. And so you get to move any one that you want, but you have to allocate all of those after every round. And so that's where some of these discipline tokens are going to come in, is you can use them to negate some of those, or to, you know, change them to a different side, if you will. And then that's going to be the dynamic, because if they end up on the square with you, then you have to flip it up and you have to see what it is, and then they spawn next to you, and if they spawn next to you, they get an attack. If you use your scout action to surprise them and flip them over, you actually get a bonus surprise attack on your end of things. And that's the other aspect of things I really, really like with these enemies, is that the weaponry is really straightforward. It's not as convoluted as I was really concerned it was going to be on the non-boss phase of things, and it really makes sense. The iconography is very crowded on these cards, but once you explain it and once you know what's there, it's super intuitive too. And so I went from going, oh my gosh, that is overcrowded and overcomplicated, and oh, that's what it all means? Oh, okay, that makes sense. So what you've got going on here in this rifles example for this case is that when you roll for an attack, you have many different things going on here. Linear, confidence, heavy. Heavy meaning, you know, I think I can only hold that gun. It's a two-handed gun. Linear meaning I have to be lined up with them. Even if the range is 4, it has to be 4 in a row. It can't be like zigzagged like that. Then this means that I roll 2 red dice. I get a reroll that's automatically included if I want to use that. It's not a token, but it's the same symbol as the token. And if I have 5 or more adrenaline, I actually get to roll an additional red die. And that's sort of that inverted combat paradigm system that they talk about, of saying, you know, the more stress you're under, the more damaged you are, the stronger you're getting as well. And then down here, it talks about the crit. And so if you have one piece of that crit, you'll notice on the dice, there are actually additional curves there. And so if you can fill in this whole curve, you get to crit, which a lot of the time will get you another attack. It tells you how much ammo you have right there with the 2 little bullets that you're going to start off with. And then burst, meaning I can fire it twice. And when I fire it, I actually, you know, have blips +1 that are going to have to be rolled for the noise. And the noise is going to happen, and this is what you're going to be choosing a lot between, is you have weapons that cause noise, you have weapons that are silent. You're going to be doing it on your moves, you're going to be doing it on your weapon fires, you're going to be doing it on a lot of stuff. And so these blips are going to get really close, and you're going to be spawning more of them, and they're going to slowly encroach you. And again, you only have 9 health, and you can't really block a whole lot, especially at the beginning, right? Spoilers. And so those are the dynamics you're going to be having to deal with as you're going along. Now, the other aspect is the discoveries, these tokens right here. In the opening scenario, they're set up, it's scripted. So, you know, it's like opening scenario discovery X, go to this page. Or I have a whole deck of cards over here that are discovery cards with numbers at the middle right there, and it just says go to that one, flip it over, and read what happens. And then do whatever it says, gain whatever it says, skill check whatever it says along those lines, so you can kind of say, okay, that's what's going on. But a lot of these aren't going to be scripted when you're doing those incursion runs, which is really freaking cool, because that's where the explorative, absolutely balls to the wall, no clue what's going to happen, having cool mysteries that someone else is never going to experience because you interacted with this one console in this way that somebody else didn't, or they passed by because they were too busy jetting to the excursion exit point because the intruders had all of a sudden just overwhelmed them, or the adversary spawned in the actual dynamic as a whole as well, because that can happen. Unlike sort of an Aeon Trespass Odyssey, there is an overarching, you know, presence of this intruder, the big bad, rather than just the little henchmen all along the way. And spoilers of some of the first scenario is that it pops up and it attacks you and it disappears. And that's the other dynamic that is so cool. And let me show you the other aspect that you got to be aware of as you're going through this before I go back to the cool part of the discoveries. With the incursion runs, essentially what you're doing is you're moving down 9 rounds until you get down to the exclamation point. And that doesn't mean that it's only a 9-round situation, but that means that when it gets down to here, stuff is just hitting the fan completely. And so this is going to dictate a lot of what dice you're rolling, what enemies are spawning, and what's happening. The white is good. And if anything is along these tracks, because some will have specific setups, then when you get to that round, when you get to that aspect, it triggers. And so the other interesting standpoint is once you start basically lurking long enough, the enemies start to know that you're there. And when you start to get into this red and black, you'll notice in the background, it actually has the same markings as the blip, meaning this spawns a blip every time. This one actually would spawn 2 blip because there's a blip there and then there's an additional blip there. And so those are the things you're going to be doing. And when you get down to the exclamation point, the intruder, the adversary, the big boss-ish thing that may be scenario specific, may just be randomly populated depending on where and what's going on, actually enters the fray, and you may not be able to actually kill them. And so it may just be run time, right? And that is the thematic incorporation of the alien even further, right? And the twists and the turns along the way, I won't spoil the first scenario, but just you think you're trying to get to somewhere, and then things just again hit the fan and you're having to backtrack and it's not going the way you want, and you have time to go get the other stuff or not along the way. And now you don't have to spend an action doing some of those things like I mentioned. You can fast scavenge, but it's going to cost you, some of these tokens. I lost the discipline token, but it's going to be costing you some of those tokens along the way in order to mitigate not only the dice rolling, but taking actions that may you not otherwise have time for with the limited actions that you have on 3 per turn. You can actually get a 4th called Exertion, but that Exertion card stays out there further, and you can not have it then for later turns where you need that extra turn, because then you're also going to be having to take one of those other ones that I mentioned a minute ago on this card as the catch your breath, essentially. And, well, catch your breath because you've overexerted yourself, because you can exert yourself, but if you exert yourself 3 times, well, then all 3 of your action spots are filled up because it doesn't go away until you take that action and you're dead. Then also, if you get 0 health, you're dead. If your adrenaline reaches 9, you're dead. If your stress reaches 9, you're dead, right? So the managing of the stress, the managing of the adrenaline, the managing of your health, all of those things, again, sounded completely and utterly overwhelming, and they just weren't. Going back to the discoveries, though, because I kind of got sidetracked there. I'm sorry. Squirrel. I just love talking about stuff, and I love talking about this. The discoveries here are going to be numbered in some cases on this side of things. However, you'll also notice that they're colored, meaning that if you are not in a scripted scenario, the color is going to correlate more based on more of the section of the spaceship that you're in. And then you're going to go flip through your book and open up to that and see what it is along those lines. And again, giving you options and variety and all sorts of craziness and mysteries to go along with this. The other clever part of this system, right, is that a lot of people are going to, again, look at this Blips and go, this is really boring. But the great part about it at the same time is you have control over it, because you choose what Blips are going where. And because they're moving along these vertices and you get to see and maneuver how you want, zigzagging, they go after the person who created the last noise. They go like that, essentially, going towards them in that way-ish. And so you can sort of move them towards one, create noise over here to get them away from the ones that they actually might be closest to in the early rounds, or when things are slightly more precarious, which is clever, which allows you to get yourself out of harm's way. That being said, sometimes they also inadvertently run into your group trying to get to the one where the noise is, because you just have to move them so much and so far. So, right? And that's just what happens, right? There's side quests on these incursions. There's additional ways to, get surprises and earn things that go along the way with some of these larger cards that the prototype gives you. And so I'm not going to spoil that and go into any further depth. But some of the other cool aspects is you're going, okay, Chris, I like that token idea thing that you were talking about earlier. But, if I can't use them and if it doesn't work out for me, right? Like, what do I do with them? Well, you have stratagems here. And the stratagems are basically like abilities that you can learn, that you get to bring in with you. And once you fill them up with a certain amount of expertise, then you get to flip them over and they give you a certain amount of use for abilities that you can, again, further unlock along the way. Because you do unlock some of the other ones, which are pretty freaking sweet. Anyway, but this one, for example, has 2 uses and you recover 3 stress. This one gets you a free move 3 action, but you do have to noise roll. And then once you run out of tokens, you flip them back over and you can start reaccumulating those tokens that maybe you didn't use, but you were getting from the activation of your adrenaline actions in the first place, because those are going to become hot and heavy. And that's another cool thing I was not expecting, because that's sort of going back and forth about Aeon Trespass Odyssey, is that sometimes you get the tokens and sometimes you don't always. And, this this gives you tons of tokens, and there's nothing worse than having those abilities than not being able to use them. Speaking of getting the cool stuff, right? Some of the stuff you're going to be picking up here as well is going to be like crate and loot tokens. And that's done in this manner. You're going to have a little crate deck, and they say put the little top here, and you actually just draw from the bottom here. So if you want to see me tilt it this way, if I, do it right, you draw from the bottom then, and you pull it out, and you get one of these, whatever it may be. And so in this case, I get, what is this, a motion detector? This is a motion tracker here. Move a blip or turn it blip 90 degrees. Now, I didn't get anything too much of the turning of the blips, but there will be directionality, they say, further on the later game. And on the other side, there's even further aspects that will be unlocked in the full game as well. What else haven't I covered? Well, the other main thing that you're doing on the intruder phase, because I've mentioned that my noise will move the blips along the map, you'll also be coming into the scanner. And so depending on what round it is, again, along this track, right, the white, the red, or the black, you draw accordingly from a shuffled up scanner deck of either the white, the black, or the red. And so what happens is you draw one of these little scanner cards. I'm not sure if this is going to show up well on the camera. It shouldn't have too much trouble though. And you put it underneath this. And you can see that there's a bunch of squiggly lines. And so radiating from whoever was the last person to make noise in the round, then going into the intruder phase, each squiggly in each quadrant corresponds to the quadrants around that character and how many they have to move those blips in those quadrants. And so it really does force things rather than just the noise, because this is the patrolling aspect that these things are doing to give it not just a completely and utterly static feel to the game of them only responding to you making noise. No, they're active creatures. They are just actively moving regardless of what you're doing too. So what haven't I got to at this point? Well, there's a few other small things. There's these Xenoscript cards, which are, again, are sort of like the combination of the stratagem and the discovery cards that I mentioned that give you abilities, but are going to make you check as well, or potentially have something bad happen. A lot of the good is also going to go with the bad. You have conditions that you'll be dealing with, that you'll be flipping, or a lot of the keywords that are similar-ish along those lines of the Aeon Trespass Odyssey, the knockback, or the blinded, or the dazed. The other thing that I did not mention is that if you ever have your health pass your stress once, you're also going to have basically a stress breakout mechanic that you're going to have to deal with, and that won't be maybe fully negative, but you're going to have to mitigate it, and it's going to take time for your body to compensate. So it's going to change your dynamic, at least for a round or two, potentially along that way. I didn't really talk about the bosses a whole lot. I didn't talk about this grid that's around the outside, because sometimes there will be positioning that you have to do, or, placement along the outside. And so this gives you a way of measuring it. On one side you have numbers, and on the other side you have letters, and so you're laying the grid out accordingly in an X like this, and it correlates to what square is going to be present on the location board as well. The last thing I didn't really talk about was the boss battling, right? You're dealing damage just like an Aeon Trespass Odyssey, very similar to a Kingdom Death Monster, where you've got your two decks. You've got your AI Protocol deck, and you've got your, we'll skip down to this one, your BP deck for the Mothman. The nice part and the similar part, if you're familiar with Aeon Trespass Odyssey here, is you have your routine, meaning, this is what Mothman does on a regular basis. It's sort of what it's doing along the way in terms of how it's reacting. And then you have its signature, meaning sometimes it just does its signature freaking attack. And so a lot of this is dealing with, especially for this boss, as a spoiler, radiation, meaning if you get 5 radiation tokens, you're dead. And so a lot of it just correlates to that. The thing I'll say, though, with some of this stuff, especially with the AI system, I was really happy with this because it is a lot more intuitive. It's a lot more streamlined. There's a lot less, at least with the stuff I've got in the prototype here, very, very, this is what you do. This is what you do based off of the noise. It's not like, well, if it's a Black Friday on the 3rd weekend of the day ending in an X, you need to go to this enemy. Like, there's not that. And I was really concerned that it was going to be a more convoluted AI system, and it's not. And it's very intuitive for the intruders, for the adversaries. And that's one of the reasons why I love it, is it takes that, although there's a lot to digest initially, the smoothness of when you're playing it is much better. And that was my biggest fear with this comparatively to Aeon Trespass Odyssey, again, as someone who loves that game. Let's just go straight into pros and cons then, right? Like, I've talked about it along the way, but if you're jumping in at this point because you wanted to hit that timestamp, here you go, right? My biggest con right now is the rulebook is a lot to digest, and there is not as much nuance there as I think it's going to need to be for the end product. The other main con that I have to say is, if you're looking at this as a solo player, the problem I have, again, is with Aeon Trespass Odyssey, similar with this, is you have to control 4 spacers at all times. So whether it's 1 player playing or 4, you get 4 of these regardless. And so it's not, at the same time, playing the counter argument to this, as upkeep heavy because of the 3-card action system, because of the very similar nature of moving this stuff and having the overlapping of what stuff is doing between each character overwhelming. I think it's still going to be much easier at 2, but it was very manageable, more so than I was expecting, truth be told, at 1, because that's what I played this all at. I played it at the 1 player count. So that has to be thrown out there. But if they do what they did with Aeon Trespass Odyssey, where they literally walk you through the steps of, this is the first scenario, this is like the intro thing, so you can get the gist of it on the final product, I think that's going to smooth over a lot of concerns from that aspect. That being said, I mean, it still needs a lot of work because it's a prototype, and there's a lot of stuff that's not in this rulebook that needs to be between now and the end with a lot of those mechanics. We didn't see anything on the upgrades necessarily of how you're doing that, of the crafting style of things, of the home base, the excursion, the incursion, going back and forth as much. Like, there's a lot of gaps there, but having this prototype in front of me also makes me feel like there's a really, really solid ground to stand on, because those are my big criticisms, right? I was really concerned about the busyness of some of these cards with what's going on there and how you're actually having to figure out this, but that's really intuitive. The scavenge actions and the interaction actions of, these other support items, I was really happy by that. The upgradableness of the spacesuits of, as you're going along, to change some of the dynamics of the tokens you're laying out, or the action cards that are going to be available to you on this double action card system. It really freaking works. And this is it's just nice. It's not like, well, you've got 10 different things you can do on your turn, Chris, and just go ahead and choose. No, these are your options, or these are your options. These are your options, or these are your options. And so it's enough. But how you customize your spacesuits, and it's going to give you different flipping options. And again, the keywords here, I mean, I wouldn't mind a little bit of, changing it just from that aspect, because again, like I said, scavenge isn't necessarily the most intuitive. It's more like an interact. And once you realize that reloading is reloading, scouting is using your light essentially to find out what the blips are, and rationalization is trying to calm yourself down, just like the catching your breath of the exertion and the stress dealing with that aspect. And yeah, you're throwing in these adrenaline tokens almost every time you use this for everything to that side. It just really makes sense, and it clicks in my head. And these games don't always click in my head. I really have trouble sometimes with the heavier games, and I thought this was going to be a lot harder game to learn than it was. But it was, at the same time, once it got onto the table and things flowed. Same thing along the signs of this, right? The enemy AI system, especially with dealing with the individual enemies on the individual runs, it really is just straightforward. And having them take 1 damage and being knocked off, but then having them potentially swarm you, it just works. It freaking works. I thought the blips were going to be bad. I thought the blips, honestly, were going to be really boring. I don't find them boring. There is a high amount of tension there, like the Alien, actual movie, of these things slowly moving closer to you and using your noise to then, if your party is more spread out, having them go more towards this way when these guys are over here. Oh, these guys haven't gone yet. Now these guys can go safely, and then they're going to move back this way. So then these guys actually aren't in trouble. So both of those things work. They work. And then you throw in the Aeon Trespass Odyssey individual runs of the boss. The other thing I didn't mention too much to, but I alluded to in the previous portion of things, is you have these intruders, right? The minions going along the board, and having to deal with them, as I accidentally grabbed the minion here guy there. But what you've got essentially going on, though, at the same time with these runs, is you have the ability for the big bosses to jump in, and they allude to it in the rule book that you can't kill them. Or can you? And so the intriguing mysteries that going along with this, with the discovery system, which just, again, works. And I really want to see what they can do with it. And I guess that's more of the question mark. How easy is it going to be to find some of this stuff? How easy is it going to be to branch off 37 different ways? Like, I want to be able to branch off, everywhere. And that's a big unknown still. But at the same time, with what I've seen with Aeon Trespass Odyssey, it makes me think with this core that it's doable. You know, the thing you may not like, again, is pulling loot from the random deck. Oh, I just pulled a random bottom card and this is one thing that I already have. Oh, it's not really that good. Oh, I pulled the random right thing from the Xenoscript or the Discovery one, and I got a rifle that wasn't supposed to be anywhere near on this ship whatsoever, and it's a little bit OP. I love that stuff. The other aspect of things is you don't lose if you have a character die, and you just get to put one of these death tokens down. And so the death token, though, apparently, for the rules and the spoilers again, right? Something may happen to this spot there that may come back to haunt you or may come back to have interactions later on. So again, the intriguing nature of that, and along with the Aeon Trespass Odyssey, where if you die, maybe sometimes you don't truly die because then you roll out your D10. And if you can roll a good number there, maybe something super awesome happens instead. So elements like that, I'm really waiting to see. I want to see what the more of the inverted combat paradigm, again, system is going to look like further on, because that's the other thing I can't really tell. How different is it going to be further along the game? How different is it going to be, especially with more of the bosses? Those are the question marks that I really want to have more explored. But that's also why it's going to be a little bit of a potential. You know, do you feel the same way I do potential wise with this game? And that's the question you have to be asking yourself. I like the idea of some of the upgrades that are going along the back side of this character here. I'm not sure what some of this stuff means. And so I'm intrigued to see how this might change some of the actions that are going to go along with this. And similarly with the spacesuits, with the couple bit that I have in the spoilers of the secret envelopes that came with when I was unlocking them and playing through them, there are some significant upgrades. And so the other thing I feared in a game like this was that it wasn't going to be like a situation where you actually get the cool stuff. No, you get the cool stuff right away. And the best part is you're going to get cooler stuff later on, as I saw with the unboxing of Aeon Trespass Odyssey Cycles 4 and 5, just the craziness that goes along with this. The other make it or break it, I think, for a lot of people is going to be the scanner, right? Is because you have just the random little blips that are going to be going, and you're not going to be able to mitigate that as much. But the dice rolling aspect of things, again, rolling these dice and having them correlate to whatever you need success-wise or whatever you need to avoid with the blip-wise, is very easily mitigatable, and you get to use the tokens, which was my biggest fear of having them go into the active and not being able to use them as a whole. So final thoughts, what do I think of this? I think this is a fantastic prototype. So the question you have to ask yourself is, are you willing to say, if this is what I am enjoying, more of the combat, Nemesis meets Aeon Trespass Odyssey with a real vibe of Alien, not with just a throw guys down and see if you can zombie side it out. This is not that. This is strategy with a little bit of luck and mitigation and chaos and craziness of not knowing what that token you're going to flip over is going to be, whether it's one of these blips, one of these discoveries, or random things that you're going to be popping up enemy-wise, or anything else in between. And for me, the answer is yes, right? So let me put this a different way. This might be also a good, food for thought for you guys. Aeon Trespass Odyssey, Chris, your best game of 2022. You love it. You just got Cycles 4 and 5. You're not going to be playing anything else between now and the rest of the year because of that. Kingdoms Forlorn. You played that too. You got to see that hands-on. Now you've got Enormity, hands-on. Of the prototypes, all three of these comparatively, this is easily the best. This is easily more what I want out of a game than Kingdoms Forlorn, with at least the prototype version of what Kingdoms Forlorn was. No questions, no qualms, flat out tell you that straightforward, as blatantly as that. This is also more approachable, more streamlined, and I think more put away, set up without losing a significant as much as Aeon Trespass Odyssey is as well. And so if they can manage that same feeling right now with this as they do with the final product, this might be the best. This would be the best Into the Unknown game for me personally. And again, saying that as someone who frickin' loves Aeon Trespass Odyssey, there's not really a higher compliment I can give it. I was hyped for this game before. I am overhyped now because of how much I like this. I know this isn't going to be for everybody, but this is amazing for me. This is easily one of, if not the best prototype crowdfunding, while on crowdfunding game that I have played all year. Easily in the top 3, if not 1 or 2 at this point. That is how much I enjoyed the tension, the dynamics, the incorporation. Everything frickin' works. And I can't say that about everything all the time. But again, the biggest thing I would say is that it was a learning curve. It was a hard learning curve for me. The rule book was a little bit tough. That's the biggest area I can say, is some of the errata, some of the clarity, some of the just give it to people who have never played the game, who have no clue what the game is, have not played any game like this, and send it to them and say, here you go. And that is the difference between, you know, this is a really good game and this is the most amazing game of all time, because I can learn it as easily as it is good. And I just want to see that happen. So there you go. Into the Unknown. Thank you for sending me the prototype, and I'm very happy with what I've got. So hopefully this is helpful for you on figuring out whether or not it's right for you, because that's really the purpose of this video more than anything else, than me gushing about how much I love board games. So thank you. Peace out. Stay classy.